Welcome everyone to our March webinar. My name is Krysten Lobisch and I'm the Marketing and Community Outreach Coordinator here at Neary Press and Training Center. I want to welcome you to Prevention for Professionals, what you need to know to prevent the perpetration of sexual abuse by children and adolescents, presented by David Prescott and Becky Palmer. Before turning this over to David and Becky, I want to tell you about Neary Press. Our mission is to share cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. For many years, we accomplished that mission only through book sales. But with changes in the last several years in the publishing and technology worlds, we've been compelled to continue our mission by expanding how we disseminate knowledge in new ways. It's important to us here at Neary Press and Training Center to hear from you what kinds of information, training, resources, and books you want and need to be the best professional possible. So please contact us with your suggestions and feedback, whether positive or negative. Just out of curiosity, how many people have participated in a Neary Press webinar before? All right, so it looks like about 2/3 of you have been here and about 1/3 of you are new. So welcome back to the people who have been here before and welcome to our new people. So I'd like to spotlight for a moment the Prevention for Professionals project, which inspired this and our upcoming follow-up webinar in June. Neary Press was excited to receive a grant for the 2018-2019 year from Vision of Hope, a project of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, to produce this project for professionals who work with children and adolescents, particularly teachers, school counselors, coaches, and other school staff members, as well as pediatric medical professionals. Through a combination of these webinars, original videos from well-known clinicians and practitioners, including our presenters today, fact sheets, articles, resource lists, and more, we hope to address topics such as healthy sexual development, consent, sexting, identifying risk factors and promoting protective factors, risk management strategies and procedures, having conversations with parents about the sexual behaviors of their children, and more. The Prevention for Professionals project website, the link for which you can see on your screen here, is currently a work in progress, and we will continue updating it through the project's completion in June. We invite you all to go take a look at what we currently have and to keep checking back. So before we get started with David and Becky's presentation, there are a few more things I'd like to share. As with all workshops, I want to let you know the learning objectives. Participants will be able to learn about adolescents who sexually abuse, learn about risk factors and warning signs for abuse, and learn about protective factors and what adults can do to help them prevent harm to others. Second, I want to let you know that the YouTube recording from this webinar will be posted on the Neary Press website within a week. Slides are currently ready to download from the Neary Press webinars page at nearypress.org/webinars if you'd like to follow along. And meanwhile, as Jonathan mentioned, you can download the slides right now from your control panel on the right-hand side. Third, when the workshop is over, be sure to answer the short survey at the end. I would love your feedback. And finally, in about a week, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recordings and to a certificate of attendance that you can download. And now I will introduce our speakers. David Prescott is the Clinical Services Development Director for the Beckett family of services. He also provides consultation to agencies around the world. Mr. Prescott has produced 17 book projects and numerous articles and chapters in the areas of assessing and treating sexual violence and trauma. His latest projects include books on feedback-informed treatment and forensic report writing, and his trauma-informed care was published in 2017. Mr. Prescott is a current fellow and past president of the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers, the largest professional organization of its kind in the world. He is also the 2014 recipient of that organization's Distinguished Contribution Award. Mr. Prescott has lectured around the world, including most recently in Australia, Japan, Germany, Iceland, Poland, Romania, Norway, Namibia, Canada, and the UK. He also serves on the editorial boards of 3 scholarly journals. Ms. Becky Palmer is past board member of ATSA, chair of Ethics Committee, and secretary for the Board of Directors. She has published articles and book chapters. She has taught and lectured at several institutions in Chicago on abusive family systems and psychotherapy of sex offenders. She completed postgraduate studies at the Institute for Juvenile Research in Marriage and Family Therapy. She provides training and consultation to other professionals. So these are our speakers today, and they're going to take over for a little while, and I'll talk to you more at the end. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you, Krysten. And let's see, Jonathan, I'm gonna await the signal that says I've been made the presenter. Here we are, show my screen and make the slides nice and big so that I'm not the only person that can see them. Hopefully everybody else can see these too. So welcome aboard. I didn't realize how many folks would be returning from prior NERI webinars. It's great to hear from you. And welcome back. I'm going to try to contain as much new information as I can. First, just a little bit about how to contact me. You've got my my email address here and website and these kinds of things. And unfortunately, it's the nature of my life that if you simply do a Google search on me and any combination of the term sexual abuse prevention, you'll probably find me to be about your first 50 hits or so. So anyway, feel free to be in touch. I don't always get to respond as quickly as I would like to, but I certainly will. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about background information. I'm going to emphasize the importance of development in the in preventing sexual abuse by adolescents, and well, frankly, as well as children. And then I'll make 4 key points that we should always hang on to. I guess my underlying agenda in all of this is to make it clear to anybody who works in the field of treating people after they've abused that not only are they in the field, in the field of prevention, but also that we can get involved in more prevention efforts by A, talking about it, and B, talking about it with the media or the public to whatever extent is possible. And from here on out, I think almost everything that I say is influenced by the late, great Faye Honey Knopp from Vermont, a wonderful person who often said that if we're ever to reduce the harm of sexual abuse, we need to start by studying the people who perpetrate it. So that's precisely what I've tried to do over time, and years of reading every research study that I can, and sometimes writing them up with people like Elisa Klein and Joan Tabachnik and Steve Benjes has left me with the conclusion that some of the best protection against abuse is maturity. The good news is that most of our kids grow up, and it's our job to help them grow up. Stability, having them be occupied with education or a job, developing supports and positive bonds and skills for intimacy, having them develop plans for the future, and then, of course, having everything to lose by doing it again. So if I had only 4 goals, it would be take every kid and make them stable, occupied, accountable to others who are supporting them, and to have them have plans in the future. These are our goals, and this alone should be our mission. Obviously, the prevalence is underestimated, but we can't go around making really bad policies based on what we don't know. In other words, yes, there's a lot of abuse out there, but we shouldn't be assuming that just because a kid engages in a harmful behavior on Monday, that he will be the same person by Thursday. There's science, which I'm going to try to advocate for, over science fiction, which sometimes makes it into the media, but more on this as I go through here. So just a little bit about the context. Something that's really important for us to remember is that that the amount of violence perpetrated by youth has actually gone down dramatically. In fact, all kinds of abuse have actually declined across the past 20 to 25 years. A lot of this coming out of the research of David Finkelhor and his colleagues at the University of New Hampshire and elsewhere. Every jurisdiction wants to claim credit for it. Everybody says it was their idea. But the truth is that nobody really knows entirely why this is the case. There's many proposed reasons. I always come back to the idea that beyond everything else, people are talking about it. That human beings, the lay public, professionals like you and me and Becky and everybody else, that we're talking about it. We're talking about the unacceptability of sexual violence. It's in the media all the time, pretty much where it should be when it does unfortunately occur. And as a result, I believe we need to keep talking about it. But the overarching trends have actually been positive. That doesn't mean we've gotten to a place where anything is acceptable yet. However, thanks to folks like you, we're moving into the right direction. So very quickly, I just thought I would mention some work done by Antonia Abbey and her colleagues. In one study, she looked at 343 college-aged men, and 33% of them reported having engaged in some form of sexual assault. Of course, sexual assault was not properly defined, and so this was more the kind of background information, but certainly a lot of men don't always know how to behave themselves sexually on college campuses. We know this. Anybody that reads the headlines knows this. However, the number that concerns me the most is that 8% of these college-aged males reported some kind of act that met standard legal definitions of rape or attempted rape. This is I think, the take-home number that we should always try to remember. And that Koff and her colleagues looked at 24% of, or actually nearly 25% of college men who reported some degree of sexual aggression since the age of 14. In that study, also, the number was pretty close to 8% that admitted to acts that met standard legal definitions of full-on sexual assault. And so I think it's important for us to remember that 92% of men bloody well don't engage or report engaging in this kind of behavior, and that could almost be something of an advertising campaign for us. However, the numbers are still really, really, really big, unacceptably high, no question about this. Abby and Pam McCausland went on to do other kinds of studies examining this, including of those that described getting involved in some form of sexual assault, again, not always very clearly defined. Encouragingly, only a minority of people were known to do it again after having done it a first time. So I only have a few minutes to speak. What I'm going to say is that people very oftentimes change in unpredictable ways. Our job as adults is to help them change in the most positive ways that they can and to offer intervention and education wherever we possibly can. However, certainly there's a lot of ways that we shouldn't be behaving ourselves. A huge barrier that we face is that we all think that they're going to look something like this, easily identified, some sort of completely difficult punk, if you will, and his t-shirt does say that, when in fact the kids that we often have coming into our clinics and into the attention of the legal system actually look a little bit more closely like this, closer to this. Very difficult to pick out of a crowd, and very often eerily normal or normative in every other respect. And so I just want to put it out there. There's a lot of sexual abuse in our communities. It's a huge issue, and we're going to need a public health approach, public health perspective over and above the psychological and criminological perspectives that a lot of us were educated in. This, of course, coming originally from the work of such pioneers as Joan Tabachnik and Gerald Blanchard, who wrote a book on exactly this topic, and many others like Elisa Klein, one of our local heroes, and many, many other folks. I guess where I'm really going with this before I move on is we need to also watch out for our language. I personally, now I'm speaking only for myself at this point, but a lot of the research that's available to us speaks in terms of things like undetected rapists. And I always come back to the idea that we need to label behaviors and not people, because if we think of them as nothing more than undetected rapists, we're forgetting the human being that's actually quite amenable to intervention and probably quite capable of change. So I just want to put that stuff out there. Ultimately, it's not as simple as a victim to victimizer hypothesis, which many of us have wondered about. However, Jill Levinson, Gwen Willis, and I have done a couple of studies in which we did look at adults who sexually abused and found, to nobody's particular surprise, that they had very high rates of various kinds of victimization in their backgrounds. By the way, one of the biggest kinds of victimization that we found with adult males and females who had sexually abused was a history of emotional abuse. Not just sexual abuse, not just being exposed to violence or experiencing violence, but also experiencing emotional abuse as well. Bottom line, we all need to take care of our kids. Okay, so some developmental aspects, key facts that we need to remember: people develop, people change. That the average age of first offense that's known it tends to be around 14. In some cases, people start at around the age of 11 before they actually finally before they finally get caught. I apologize for talking so fast. I like to get as much information in as I can. And that, well, I'm going to linger on that point just for one moment. There's a lot that we don't know, but this means that there's a lot of opportunity for education and intervention from a much earlier age, and that a lot of what works in our interventions is when we get people to make their own case for why they should change or approach the goals that are important to them in their lives. What I'm really saying here is we should always think about developmental processes and use them as your ally, that all kids want to go on to have a better life than they have today, and that all kids want to go on to do the best work in and be the best person that they can be in this world, which is why I always say on day one of social work school or counseling, your counseling program, you learn to meet your client where they're at, and I say meet your client where they dream. This person here, Terry Moffitt, 1993 was a long time ago, but the effects of this study are still unfolding. She found that there's basically three kinds of teenagers that get themselves into trouble. And the first is the one that's the most like all of us, that we sometimes, not all of us, but many of us got into trouble or did something that was against the law when we were teenagers, but that we stopped by the time we were adults. This is the most common kind of teenager that there is. She found that there were some kinds of kids that get started earlier and then go on to persist across the lifespan with some kind of neuropathology at work or without neuropathology. In other words, most kids, when they get into trouble, only do so as adolescents, and there's a small subset that get into trouble. They start earlier and they persist a little bit longer into adulthood. Again, I want to emphasize the fact that kids can and do change. And then, of course, there's the environments that these kids grew up in. And I just used this headline that I saw in the news a couple of years ago. Our kids very often grow up with all kinds of insults to their physical development as well as their psychological development. In this case, the headline was about chemicals found in food products that are also the same chemicals that make up your yoga mat, for those of you that attend yoga class. Those of us who practice yoga know that after a while you develop special feelings for your yoga mat, but I don't think we should go around eating them either. I'm sorry, just being a little bit flippant about it, but we never entirely know the kinds of environmental stressors that our kids are facing. This fellow here, Vern QUINSEY, looked at the predictors of juvenile delinquency amongst kids ages 6 to 11, and here you see them. Things like, have they already done it and gotten caught? Have they taken up substance abuse at a very early age? In all of our current discussions about college-age kids engaged in sexual violence, I'm often concerned that we haven't talked enough about the role of substance abuse, certainly being male, having low socioeconomic status, an antisocial parent, et cetera, et cetera. By the time kids become adolescents, all of a sudden these same risk factors for getting started in crime seem to have changed. Peer groupings tend to be far more important. It's just important to bear this kind of thing in mind. Kids change a lot. Many of us have thought, well, maybe once they start getting into trouble, we should punish them. But massive studies have found that that doesn't work either, that there's been any number of meta-analyses that have found that on its own, punishment doesn't work. We need to remember that prison is not the same thing as prevention. And so the researchers have made it very, very clear that we should not be using prisons and intermediate sanctions with the expectation of reducing criminal behavior. Intermediate sanctions, of course, means things like Scared Straight or Project Dare, the kinds of things that are issued to all kids in a similar dosage, where all kids get the exact same intervention. This kind of thing doesn't work. The best efforts at prevention are individualized as well as group-based. So I'm just going to leave that thought with you there and get into 4 basic principles. The first is that adolescents are not the same thing as little adults. Most kids, when they do abuse others sexually, do not go on to do it again, and that we need to tap into their resiliency and protective factors and to be informed by the trauma histories that they've experienced. So key point, adolescents, they are teenagers, they're not little adults. And I just draw on this paper done by Elizabeth LETOURNEAU and Mike Miner, who said that there's 3 basic realities. The first is we have the opportunity to intervene once we know that a kid is on the wrong track, that they have more in common with other kids who get in trouble with the law than they do with adult sex offenders, for example, and that their reoffense rates are very different from those of adults. The bottom line is that we need expertise in adolescence, in adolescent development, sexual development, and understanding the trajectories of sexual violence and general criminality to best be able to identify when kids might be at risk. Many of you will be aware of this, but most kids do not reoffend sexually. This comes from the work most recently of Mike Caldwell, who did a massive meta-analysis of the most recent studies and found a sexual reoffense rate by teenagers down around 2.75%. His study did screen out kids with severe mental illnesses, but nonetheless, these numbers are much lower than most people ever imagined. And almost finally, we need to always tap into the resilience and protective factors against future harm that already exist within these kids. Things like supportive families. Oh, I just have to point out, this is the pictures you see are of Janice Bremer, a friend of mine, and Jane Gilligan, who've written extensively on this, so I'm borrowing from their work. All of these kinds of factors that you see here, education, stability, adequate knowledge about human sexuality, having a confidant, being able to regulate one's emotions, opportunities to explore interests, and hope, as well as plans for the future. This is what we need to build in our treatment programs. This is what we need to work on in our schools. Finally, I'll just say the importance of trauma-informed care cannot be underestimated, and I mean really trauma-informed. It can be difficult for us to always fully comprehend just how influenced our kids are by the nasty experiences that they've often gone through. And I'll just say, including emotional abuse and neglect, which can be critical factors in the origins of sexual violence. So on that note, I am going to turn it over to Becky. Jonathan, if you can help with that, I sure would be obliged, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Hi, I'm Becky Palmer, and I'm really glad to be with you today. I'm going to talk a lot about the family situations that many of these youth come from. It's easy to reach me. Either you can email me or you can call me on my cell phone. It goes without saying that the disclosure of sexual abuse is devastating to families. But as many family therapists, we must remain cognizant and sensitive to the family's current situation. While as a therapist, it may be overwhelming to hear the abuse details of some of the families we treat, sexual abuse may not be the worst thing that has happened to them, nor their most immediate problem. We must engage the families and understand what their current needs are, even though we are tasked with helping them. We need to understand the impact of sexual abuse and help the family function in a safe and healthy manner. Engaging them in the family therapy will help them understand the work their family member is doing in individual and group treatment. And trust me, you want all the positive support you can muster to help the youth in treatment. There are a few tools that work quite well in assessing the family system. Because they are visual, it's easy to engage family members of all ages in the assessment and treatment process. So, who are the stakeholders and why should we be concerned about the stakeholders? Well, sexual abuse, as David had mentioned, is a public health problem. And I always operate on the assumption that all kids want to do well. And when they're not doing well, we must discover why. So the stakeholders are the people in our community, the probation officer, the victim therapist, the courts, our Department of Child and Family Services, and family members, whether immediate or extended. They all have an investment in the outcome. While the outcome may be the same for all of the stakeholders, which might be no more sexual abuse, no more victims, how we get there may be different for each of the different stakeholders. And so I found that if we don't connect with each of our stakeholders who are involved in the case, then it can help derail or make treatment all the more challenging. And as the family therapist, you're in a pretty good position to work with the stakeholders because you're working with the entire family system. So there are a variety of treatment settings that youth may be in. Some of you may be working in residential settings, some in juvenile justice settings, and others may be working in outpatient in the community. So how we conduct family therapy can be dependent upon where the youth is living at the time of the referral. The treatment setting where the youth is can also determine the needs for the family and youth. Like considering where will the youth live once the treatment is complete. So often youth are not released from juvenile justice or from residential treatment until they've completed treatment. And so the question is, where will they go to live? Will they return back home? Will they return to an independent living situation, foster care, group home, or with extended family member? The reality is that the family can be a support system for the youth to prevent sexual abuse. So my colleagues, Worling and Langstrom, did some research and discovered that there's some empirically supported risk factors. But I really want to talk about now would be a really good time for me to tell you about why doing family therapy is prevention for sexual abuse. Most, if any, youth do not live in a vacuum. They all have family somewhere and likely will return to live with biological family or a family of choice. While you'll see later what the treatment targets and goals are for the families, you will notice that the empirically supported risk factors can and should be attended to in family therapy. Also, the family needs to understand what the risk factors are and what can and should be done to help diminish the risk factors. Much like with the family that I worked with last night, we're talking about predicting when the next problem might arise. And they said, well, why do we want to think about that? And I said, well, because one, we won't be surprised. Two, we'll understand what we need to do. And now we can work on what needs to be done to prevent that from happening. So when we engage families of youth who have committed sexual offenses, We've enlisted partners in the process of change and have highlighted necessary protective factors. Let's take a look now at the promising risk factors. While these risk factors will certainly be addressed in the youth's individual and group therapy, imagine the impact of the family addressing the problematic relationship. Secondly, imagine the bounty of information and input you will have as the family therapist to help address attitudes supportive of sexual offending. While this is a broad statement, I'm reasonably sure it will not take too much time with the family to begin to hear and see the expression of attitudes supportive of sexual offending. Hopefully you can begin to see the value and importance of having family therapy as part of the treatment program for youth who've committed sexual offenses. Having only the youth in treatment is like taking your dog to an obedience class and leaving him or her there and picking them up in a few months and expecting them to be obedient, while you have done nothing to change how you interact with your pet. Not that adolescents are pets, but it takes every family member to be involved to help support and change the family system. So here are some of the common treatment goals that we have for youth who are in treatment: to accept responsibility for behaviors. And it goes without saying that if the youth hasn't learned to accept responsibility for his or her choices and behaviors, we will likely discover the genesis of that within the family system. Identifying the contributing factors. The old saying, 2 heads are better than 1, applies here. While we may have the family sitting in our office, we can easily begin to understand some of the contributing factors. Oftentimes, the contribution of ideas from family members is immensely helpful. Exploring and utilizing effective coping strategies. One of my favorite interventions to utilize in family therapy is when family members learn something new, I get them to practice the new skill in the session. I may even give an assignment to practice the skill at home, and next session report back on how it went. What were the successes and what were the challenges? Next is developing pro-social skills and competencies. Much like practicing the effective coping strategies, I would utilize some of the same interventions for developing pro-social skills and competencies. Establishing positive peer relationships. When you work with the entire family system, it's always interesting and helpful to get all family members' feedback and to help understand and support the youth in this area. Promoting healthy family functioning. Of course, family therapy would be a good way to do this. So last but not least, helping the family understand that they are not always bad or that they never do certain things is the beginning of helping them all understand their protective factors, and that while sexual abuse has happened, there are good things happening in the family. Some of the common treatment targets for youth who are in treatment. And the reason I'm really talking about family therapy here as being part of the prevention process for sexual abuse, if you can go back and remember some of the things that David talked about, having that supportive network, being occupied, having people who care. These are the things that the youth will deal with in their individual treatment, but these are also can be focuses of treatment in the family setting as well, and support the change that the youth has made in treatment. So why family therapy? Why should we do it? You know, I have there are a number of well-known family therapists, but 3 of my favorites are Virginia Satir, who had the transformational systemic family therapy. And she said, why family therapy? Because it deals with family pain. And like I said at the beginning, when families find out about the sexual abuse, it's devastating and it is painful. Salvador Minuchin had the structural family therapy, and structural family therapy addresses problems in the functioning within the family. And Murray Bowen uses systems thinking to describe the interactions, how people communicate, how they interact, How close are they? How far apart are they? So the purpose of family therapy is really to help improve communication. And I think one of the pieces that I really do work with in working with families is because often they're really all are all or never. My mom always does this, or my father never does this, and really getting them to see that it's not always a never, but that there are times when mom does certain things and when dad doesn't do certain things. So the purpose of family therapy is also helping to empower all family members, and particularly when we're working with families where the sexual abuse has been sibling sexual abuse or within an extended family. It helps all family members to have a voice, to share what their feelings are, and to be part of the process of healing and creating a safety plan. So the family is a system. What's a system? Well, we have body systems. You know, we have an immune system, we have a digestive system, we have all of these different parts that work together to help us function. And a body system is very similar to a family system. When one part is out of whack or having trouble, the rest of the system is not working quite as well as it should be. Much like cars. Now this is I believe it's a BMW, but you can correct me at the end here. You know, it has nice headlights, it has a nice bumper, but each of those things independently does not make a car. But we can put it together and it makes this absolutely beautiful car that a lot of people desire having. So what's a family system? Well, this has been attributed to Aristotle, though it's not. He said something similar to this, but family therapists basically see the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's how we think about families. So the family is a living organism. There are problems are treated by changing the way the system works and the way the system interacts. It identifies those strengths and resiliencies within the family system, and it treats the family as a whole. Now, problems cannot be changed unless we help the family find a way to think about it. I remember in my early training at the Institute for Juvenile Research, I was seeing a single dad and his son, and I think I had probably joined a little bit too much and felt too much sympathy to see the problem any differently than they saw the problem. And I remember my mentor and the viewing team behind the one-way mirror called in, and they finally said, Becky, if you can't find a different way to think about this, nothing's going to change. You have to help them find a different way to think about this. And that really is a lot about what family therapy is about, is helping them find another way to think about it so that things can change. So what are some of the reasons to do family therapy? Why should we engage the family? One is to help instill hope. It's often a good place to help develop the safety plan that might be necessary within the family. And in the case of sexual abuse, addressing denial in the family system can be powerful. When working with families, you may have different family members at different places in denial. And I think it's important, I'd like to say right now, it's really important for us to think about denial as being protective. And our job as the family therapist is to understand what is it protecting, as opposed to saying they're lying, they won't talk about it. I think if we see it as protective, I think that creates the most mobility for us to help work with the family. So what is the role of the family therapist when you're working with families? Well, the obvious is safety for the victim. And what I'd like to say here is that I never do family sessions with the victim and any family members who are still in denial about the facts of the abuse. To have a session with a victim and a family member, but particularly the perpetrator who still denies that it happened, you're just re-victimizing the victim. There are a lot of strategies. You may do entire family sessions when everyone's no longer in denial. You may need to do some couples, working with the mom and the dad, or doing some psychoeducational around parenting and discipline and setting limits. Sibling therapy is also important, and working with that subsystem to strengthen it. And then extended family members. I think that's why it's really important for us to understand who has some say and power and control in this family. And sometimes they're grandparents or clergy for the family. And so some of the tools that we can use with families are genograms, doing a structural session, having acknowledgement sessions about the abuse, and modeling open and honest communication. Instilling hope is so very, very important. When we begin working with families, they are often at their lowest in believing they can change. They may be highly protective because they have felt judged by others and other parts of the system, or even by extended family. Families need to know that as a family therapist, you expect them to change because one of your goals is to prevent sexual abuse. As the family therapist, you need to affirm their fear and their belief that change is hard, because we all know it, but that you're right there working with the family to make the necessary changes to prevent future sexual abuse. So what is it we know? So children are still developing, their bodies and brains are still forming, and will continue to do so even into early adulthood. To ensure the safety of children and adults need to understand what is normative, as David had mentioned earlier. Parents and caretakers and other adults need training to understand these differences, learn what is normative from each developmental stage. Adolescence is a period of exploration, high risk, and offers opportunity for growth. We want to help change the harmful behaviors into helpful, healthy sexual behaviors and communication. And research does show us that early intervention and treatment can change a child's developmental trajectory towards a healthy and productive life. So what are some characteristics of family systems at high risk for sibling incest? I put this up there. I know that we're close to running out of time here to have questions answered, but you will have these in your handouts. Change starts when someone sees the next step. That really is our goal, is that we're taking this family on a journey, and they need to trust us that we are going to help them change in positive ways. I'm going to turn it back to for questions, as I see my time is up. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks. Hi, Krysten. I can see you there.
Hello.
So I know you might have gotten some questions. I certainly had a question myself, but I don't want to go first if there's somebody more deserving.
I don't know if I would say more deserving, but there were a couple questions that came through for us if you'd like me to address some of those first.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead?
All right, so some of these I think it will be clear who they are directed to. If they don't appear to be directed to anyone, then I will throw them out there, and whoever wants to answer them can do that.
Sure.
So Becky, I got a question about what does one do when there is no family or a new family, such as a recently assigned foster family?
What I would do would be to include the family in the treatment process, help educate them. I think it's a perfect opportunity to begin to build trust and safety with the foster parents, or let's say maybe it's extended family who's asked to have the youth live with them, and help the youth explain what treatment they have been through at that time, and also begin to answer some of the questions for the new foster parents.
Thank you. Somebody else wanted to know, after the webinar, can you please tell them if there are any resources for families where sex abuse happened between step siblings when they were kids, but they are now adults?
I'd have to think about that. That's not uncommon. I've seen a number of families who came in to see me for family therapy as adults when they had never disclosed the sexual abuse as children. But I'll have to think about that in terms of what resources. But I think
Becky,
go ahead.
Becky, what do you think about Jan Hindman's Just Before Dawn? It's an oldie but a goodie. And I know it was originally designed for sort of clarification between kids, but I believe she had a lot of examples of how to work with clarifying abuse long after it had happened.
Mm-hmm. You know, and one of the things I find also in working with those families, I think that's a good suggestion, is Jan Hindman's book, is that a lot of times it's really not about the sexual abuse, but it's about the relationship and how they interact and how they still continue to treat each other in maybe inappropriate ways and not necessarily sexually.
Yeah, there was another book called I'm trying to remember, The Relational Harm of Incest. I think Amazon and the two keys would be relational and incest, that might help. And just so that we're clear for the person asking the question, it's the book was Just Before Dawn, and it was by Jan Hindman, Hindman. She was one of the best, sadly passed away a decade or so ago. It's, like I said, an oldie but a goodie. So I hope that that's useful. It's an excellent, excellent question.
Thank you. So the next one is for both of you. It says, do either of the presenters have information on evidence-informed curricula programs or even community-level interventions for prevention?
The last I heard, there were some under development. I probably shouldn't name names. Joan Tabachnik, I know, has been involved in at least a cheerleading role in some of these things. I know that there has been some funding and that there's been some research underway. I also know that in the current environment, it's really been difficult to develop true evidence-based approaches in this area, just because of the nature of funding for this research has kind of come and gone, I'm sad to say. Becky?
Yeah, I think I would also suggest maybe going to the NERI website to see what publications do currently exist. There's also a Safer Society Press that also has books. And I'm with David, it's like there's still research being done and nothing has really been published on that question, but that's an excellent question and one that we should continue to think about and discuss.
Yeah. Actually, Becky, now that you're mentioning it, can I recommend going to the NERI newsletter? Because it occurs to me, I think we wrote something on at least some attempts to do this. If you look up NERI newsletter, NERI has all of its newsletters. I'm proud to say I've been involved in every single one of them, going all the way back to April of 2008. Yeah, that's right. We're coming up on our 11th year of doing this. And I'm pretty sure we wrote something. It might take some work. If the questioner also wants to email me, I might be able to find it. But I'm sorry, this is the memory of a middle-aged guy at work. So I'm trying. I wish you were more.
Thanks, David. We really appreciate all of those many years of helping us out.
Sure.
There's a great question I thought we'd want to cover before the end about What do we do when a child has a high-functioning diagnosis of autism and is pursuing sexual interactions with a brother or sister?
Go ahead, Becky, unless you want me to go first.
Yeah. I guess I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but the question is, should the family stay together? Should the youth who has the autism continue to live in the family system? How teachable is the youth who has the autism in terms of learning boundaries and working with the family? I think that's a tough one. I don't think that it's not an uncommon one. You know, it's as common as sometimes a family member who is developmentally disabled, who also has a problem, and how does the family work with them? David, add to that.
Sure. So one of the first things I start to wonder about is high-functioning autism or high-functioning autistic people very often either that they are feeling extremely socially isolated and do not feel competent in the context of their relationships. And sometimes it can be that there's some kind of unusual fascination. Some sort of fascination with something in their life is a hallmark of high-functioning autism. When that object of fascination also maps on to their sexuality, then also you've got some issues that are involved. If I were to only have one wish for kids with what we used to call Asperger's disorder, social pragmatic disorder, the place I would try to emphasize as much as possible is building their skills so that they can feel competent in as many interpersonal relationships as they can, and developing their abilities to relate to others empathically. I realize that's a very, very tall order. And then, of course, the other thing is safety first, safety first, safety first. I would want the kid who is at risk of harm, of being harmed, to have as much safety and supervision within the home as possible, and some kind of family intervention where it's very clear, look, we are here in order to be the safest, healthiest, happiest family that we can be, and that is going to be our primary focus. How was that, Becky?
That's excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Together, I think, and good luck to the questioner, because I'm truly feeling your pain right now.
Yeah.
Well, the questioner will have contact information, so
Sure.
I encourage that questioner and anybody who has questions who we don't necessarily get to. Would that be okay for us to forward their questions to you, or
Sure.
for us to let them know that they can reach out to you with those questions?
Yeah.
And I'm saying something here too about Gary Blasengame's book, An Introduction to Autism Spectrum Disorder, Sexual Behaviors and Therapeutic Intervention. Gary really knows his stuff. Gary is spelled G-E-R-R-Y, last name Blasingame, B-L-A-S-I-N-G-A-M-E. So that I'd recommend anything that he's written.
Yep.
Great. And one little quickie thing, somebody typed, will you please repeat the name of the book that was by Jan Hyndam?
Yeah, sure. It's Just Before Dawn, as in, you know how it's darkest before dawn. So the name of the book is Just Before Dawn. I think it's been out of print for quite some time. However, you can pick it up to used booksellers fairly easily. It was self-published. Jan herself is worth a Google search. She was a highly charismatic, highly powerful speaker and writer. If you're watching this and you want to email me, I'll send you a chapter that she wrote on how we approach this kind of work. It's from a book I did a long time ago. I think it was the last thing that she ever published, and I can send it to you as a PDF because the book is now out of print. So.
Thank you both so much, presenters. Unfortunately, we're going to have to move into our little final part of today, but it was really wonderful listening to you. And we were all really glad that you were both able to be here today with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Krysten. Thanks, Becky. Always nice to work with you.
All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of wrap up before we finish up the session today. So firstly, we invite you to take a look at the rest of our webinar lineup for the season, which you can see here and which can be found on our website, nearypress.org. You can actually go there today and register for part 2 of this webinar series, which is coming in June. You could register now, so you won't even have to worry about it later on. Also, we offer limited low-cost CE credits for all of our 2018-2019 webinars and some of our past webinars. For details about how to obtain CE credits, please visit nearypress.org/webinars and read through our CE process. If you still have questions after that, you can email me at klobisch@neary.com. I'd like to let you know, as David mentioned, we also publish a free monthly newsletter in which we discuss a new or controversial journal article or research paper and examine its implications for clinicians in the field. You are automatically signed up for this resource, and I hope you'll find it helpful. Thank you to all of our 2018-2019 sponsors. You can see them here on the screen. They are organizations, agencies, and individuals, and we would definitely not be able to hold these webinars without their support. So thank you very much. If you liked this webinar, you can see our previous webinars on our website and on Neary Press's YouTube channel. As I said, it's possible to pay for CE credits for all past recorded webinars. Thank you to David and Becky for such a great webinar, and a huge thank you to all of you for attending, especially our new people. I'd like to say again how much we welcome your feedback, so please be sure to take 3 or 4 minutes and complete the evaluation form that'll pop up when you close out the webinar. If you have questions, please put them down on that form and we will either forward them to our presenters or you will be able to reach out to the presenters directly. And as a final note, we know that you were not able to download Becky's slides from this platform. They are now available to download from the website under our webinars page. So if you would like copies, both sets of slides will be available for you to download there. Thank you so much, and we wish you all a great day.